Welcome back, dudes and dudettes, to another episode of Just a Dude Podcast, where we dive deep into the minds behind the stories that shape our imaginations. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we're strapping in for a journey through a world where the discarded find purpose. That's right, we're talking about a place where machines get a second chance at life, or at least a second chapter in their saga. So buckle up, because we're heading into Junkworld. Today, we've got a very special guest with us, the mastermind behind this mechanized marvel of a tale, MK Stangland. Michael is not just any writer. He's the creator of Junkworld, The Ballad of Leroy Brown, a novel that's redefining the landscape of sci-fi. In this book, Michael takes us to a universe where the forgotten machines of our world find new adventures and, dare I say, new identities. Michael, welcome to Just a Dude Podcast. It's an honor to have you here to chat about your fascinating world of junk and the epic ballad of Leroy Brown. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy coming on and having an opportunity to talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is amazing seeing that you've got this book out, and I know we've talked and it's been out for a little while, but before we get into the book, I wanted to let the audience know a little bit about you. So if you want to tell them a little bit about your background and maybe how you got into writing.
Well, on some level, writing has been something I've been doing in one way or another since I was real young. I mean, obviously, some of it would have been really crude stuff, but I can remember, like, one of the earliest attempts was something I called, like, The Flying Trees, which was basically just stories about my family, but what if we were trees that could uproot and fly around? Another early attempts are, even before I understood the concept, there was basically short stories, basically fan fiction for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, nice.
Amusingly, one of them was about what involved time travel even before I realized, oh, yeah, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles traveling through time is one of those big reoccurring story beats that gets touched on. But,
yep.
So on some level, it's always been something that I've been doing. Some of it is kind of like downshifted, taken less importance as I've looked at other things, but I mean, look, writing in one form or another has always been something that has been a part of my life. So, I mean, I can kind of point to important points, but I can't really point to a genuine part of where I said, yes, this is definitely when I want to focus on writing.
Yeah, I gotcha. So it's something that's always been a part of your life and something that you just has essentially been a part of you.
Not necessarily always the thing that I primarily wanted to do, but always something that I have done in some capacity.
Excellent. So what inspires your storytelling? Do you have anything that inspires? Is it different thoughts, different things in the world, or?
I would say that really I find inspiration can come from anywhere. It can it could come from, well, I see a quote from a person. For example, now this may be something that kind of gives away a potential story idea, but there's a certain quote from Steve Jobs saying, well, you can't pay someone to get sick for you. Well, you look at that and you think, okay, but what if you could? And then right there you think, well, that is a potential story idea.
Yeah.
And so in that same way, I mean, there have been times where I have seen people say, here's an interesting event that happened sometime. And I'm thinking, okay, I think I could maybe turn this into an interesting story or create a narrative story of it. So yeah, really, I think that inspiration for stories can really come from anywhere. It can come from the most unexpected places. I mean, it could come just from, I'm trying to brainstorm one story and it kind of sparks off other ideas. So yeah, it's a matter of, it can come from anywhere. It could come at any time.
So you just essentially will just let anything inspire you, and if it happens, you just run with it.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah, it's if an idea comes that I think I could get a good story out of this, I'd enjoy writing a story about this, then I will try and take note of it for future use. Like, I've got a file that I think has at least a couple dozen concepts noted down of, hey, can I get to this at some point and create a full story out of this?
Yeah, excellent. I mean, and that makes sense too, because obviously you can't write everything right now, right this second.
Yeah.
as much as we would love to do everything right now, yeah, things take time. So, Michael, being an author and a writer, is that your day job? Is that your, how do I say it? I guess to your bread and butter, or do you do something else as well?
Right now, it is effectively a hobby that I would like to turn into a primary career, but
Easier said than done.
Yeah, it is easier said than done. One of the common things I've heard said is, it's impressive even to just get a story written.
Yeah.
But I have found, because I have written a few stories that I've tried to get published, and I'm finding increasingly, could just be from perspective, because that it feels like it's more impressive to actually get an audience for it and write something and connect it with an audience and actually get it where you can, in fact, financially benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, kind of like, and obviously you've been doing yours a little bit longer than me, but I'm the same way with podcasting. This is a hobby of mine. It's a love. I like to bring stories to other people that are just like me. And, hey, if I were to make money off of it, I would never say no. But as of right now, I'm not. It's just a fun hobby, and I love connecting with folks.
Yeah, it is one of those things where, there's a level of, I'm going to keep doing this regardless. The ultimate goal is to be able to say, yes, this is the primary way I support myself. But that's very difficult to do if you don't enjoy doing it anyway. Like, I would not be able to keep doing this if I did not enjoy writing anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the old saying, if you do something that you love, you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So as far as your writing is concerned, Michael, is there a specific genre or, type of writing you like to do? Like, I know sci-fi or, drama. Is there anything, or are you kind of like to write all over the place?
I am primarily in the realm of science fiction fantasy. Junkworld, that is very much a science fiction book. The book I am currently working on to plan to release next is a fantasy. Other books that I've written that are kind of on the shelf waiting for their opportunity, they are science fiction. There is a part of me that if I had the opportunity, I could see challenging myself in different genres. Can I come up with an idea I like in this genre and put together a story, as much as anything, to try and challenge myself and see, okay, can I write a good story in this genre that I'm not necessarily focused on, or I may not be might be outside of what I normally kind of write. But primarily it's the realm of science fiction, science fantasy, that region.
Awesome. Which is totally fine with me because I love science fiction stories. I think it just really brings not only storytelling, but the imagination, alive. And you can actually use your imagination when you're reading a science fiction novel to know that, hey, I can actually put these words into a picture into my own brain by using creativity.
Yeah, and there's also an element of, one of the major reasons that people read stories is escapism. And there's an extra level of escapism if you can create this fictional world that people can escape to, and it feels like, I'm really escaping into this world that
it's like it gives you a break from the normal everyday life.
And something that you can, even if some of the stuff may not quite lead up, it's a good enough story that you can ignore if some of the stuff may be just a little bit convenient or falls into, because there are very few stories that are 100% realistic. There is, and there is very that what I should remember the term, but it's all like on the tip of my tongue. The plausible, like where something shouldn't work, but you're willing to look. For the life of me, I can't remember the term.
That's okay. As soon as we start talking, you'll remember it.
Yeah.
But no, I get it. It's like you could almost put yourself into a different situation where you take some realism and some imagination and kind of mash it together to come up with this. I don't want to call it a fantasy world, but a science fiction world, to get you out of your everyday life. So speaking of science fiction, we might as well talk about your latest book, Junkworld, The Ballad of Leroy Brown, right? That's the name of it. I love that. I don't know why Leroy Brown it resonates with me. And I think like adding that to the title of your book for some reason just really sucked me in. I can't explain why, but it just did. Maybe that's the normal everyday person part of me, that can just relate. But do you want to give the audience a little bit of like what the premise of your book is for Junkworld?
All right, so the premise is it takes point at an unspecified point in the future. It is a universe that involves Earth, though that basically only gets a point of mention. So it starts out on this world where you have an underground robot combat league where people if you've seen something like BattleBots or Real Steel, those kind of things, it's that kind of place. And you have this robot. It's a former military robot turned arena fighter, and he's like at the top of his game. Crowds love him in that. So what happens, though, is after, becoming the undefeated champion, beating this other robot that's also undefeated, he gets turned off for maintenance. But when he's reactivated, he finds himself kind of in pieces and on Junkworld. Now, obviously, based on the setup, he's certain he's there by mistake. So he makes it his mission to find a way to go back to where he's supposed to be. And as this goes on, he gets wrapped up in this other plot involving a robot known as the Top Dog that is trying to conquer Junkworld. Junkworld being a planet that's basically a giant junkyard, but there are robots that have been sent there that have been reactivated. But on a junkyard planet, what is your purpose anymore? So they've kind of tried to find some way to create a new life for themselves. Well, the Top Dog, he's trying to conquer Junkworld. But for some reason that only the Top Dog seems to know, he takes a particular interest in Leroy when he learns about him. So Leroy finds his quest to go back to where he thinks he's supposed to be intertwined with, the fight against the Top Dog. And so it's an intermingling of those two that there's definitely some twists in there. But yeah, there's ultimately a story about a robot that... Well, there's an underlying element of if imagine you have your life figured out, but then life comes along and flips the table on you, throws everything in disarray. Well, how do you respond to that, and where do you go knowing things aren't the way you think they're supposed to be?
This almost sounds like real life, Michael, other than robots. But yeah, if you think about it, I mean, that's something that definitely readers can relate to. We see that in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
Where we think it's supposed to go one way, and then there's something that happens that throws a wrench in it, and next thing you know, it's like you're starting all over again. And what is there any type of, I don't want to give the book away by any means, but with the book, is there any specific type of message that you're trying to get across to readers?
Well, in some ways, I'd say that, that element that I mentioned is kind of in there. It's okay, what are the choices you make when life doesn't go the way you intend, or when life totally upends things? I'd say that's, if there's a message to be had, that would be primary message. What are the choices we make in response to what life throws at us?
Yeah, and how can we overcome that adversity, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to follow the story of Leroy Brown and find out what happens.
Yeah, and part of that I think is emphasized by the fact that, I don't want to say too much about him, but there is a very close connection between Leroy Brown and the Top Dog. That the stuff as far as, okay, why does the Top Dog care about Leroy Brown and all that? All of that is explained, and it's one of those things where I certainly hope that I laid it out, where if you're reading through it again, knowing what happens, you can pick up on, okay, here are the clues that says this guy knew where he was going. He didn't just make things up along. And so, yeah, so in some ways you can see a parallel of two different directions between Leroy Brown and the main villain.
Yeah, I love that, though, that you've kind of written it in an aspect that not only can you read the book and go through and see the twists and turns, but you made it so that if you could go back and you could see the little nuances and like, oh, why didn't I catch that before? I think a lot of people, when you look at any type of storytelling, love that when you can go and revisit a story and then find those little Easter eggs, that really show you, and you're like, oh, now that I know what's going to happen, I should have seen this before. So that's pretty awesome. I like that, Michael. Is there, in the book that you wrote, is there a favorite part that you wrote?
I'm not sure I could nail down one particular scene, though one thing I found amusing after, I had the manuscript finished, basically nailed down, is what I discovered is most of the stuff I really enjoy that actually involves the top dog, the villain, where admittedly I'm biased, but I think I really like the way that the top dog, what I put together for the top dog, and it's a villain that I really enjoy, where I do have to wonder, okay, is this a villain that I could say that it is one of my favorite, or am I just that biased because this is my own creation? So
right.
so
Yeah, I like that. I like that though, because it's like, if that's your favorite, you've obviously built a good story arc for that character. And I know we can't talk about too much of it. Obviously, I
yeah,
want
because
folks to go out and buy the book, but
yeah, and it's one of those things where I can't say too much, because to say too much would spoil
give it
the
away,
twists
right? We
that
don't want to
are
give
in
it
the
away.
book. And certainly I hope that there's more value to the book and reading, where someone could know all the twists and still enjoy it. But at the same time, for
Right.
people who haven't read it, I don't want to give it away. But
Yeah. No spoilers.
but yeah, I think that what I did, what I certainly wanted to try and do, is present, well, this isn't a villain who does dumb things for the sake of for plot convenience. He's very much is a character where you can see how Leroy Brown is uniquely qualified to defeat him, but not because of some contrived instance. So
Gotcha.
like, he's a
Excellent.
character that is physically dangerous. He's a character that is intelligent. He is a villain that you can see how he works, and you could get an idea of, yeah, this is how he could have actually reached where he is.
So you got just a nice character built, and some understanding behind him, just not a villain for the sake of being a villain, right?
Yeah, he's not one of those, I'd say, sympathetic villains but at the same time, you can understand motivation.
Yeah. Yep. Understood. Yeah, I like that, because maybe you're not going to like the top dog, but you can understand at least where he's coming from, what his motivation is behind what he does, and gives you that understanding. It's kind of like we have in this world. There might be some people out there where, like, I don't like them. You could talk about, politics. You see that all the time. People don't like one side or the other, but yeah, kind of like that. But you can see why they're doing the things that they're doing.
Yeah. Or alternatively, he's a character you like, but he's a character you like that you're still rooting for him to lose.
Yeah, one that you like to hate, or is not a like to hate, but yeah, like a love-hate relationship.
I think when it comes to villains, are typically my favorite kind. You like watching what the character does, but you wouldn't want
Yes.
to genuinely be in the same room as that person.
You don't want to hang out with them. Yeah.
Yeah, consider some of the classics, like big one, Emperor Palpatine. People love Emperor Palpatine as a villain, but I doubt many people would actually want to meet him in person.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect example, because you're right. Everybody loves him. He's like one of the most known villains, right, of all times, and we know why. But yeah, you don't want to hang out with him. You don't want him at your dinner table with your family, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously it took some time to write this book and to get your ideas out there on paper. And what would you say was your biggest challenge in writing the novel?
The biggest challenge during the process comes down to, when you hear one of the frequent talking points when writing is, you need to know when to kill your darlings and that. So there's this element of, it's very, very difficult, very rare to write a first draft that is exactly as it needs to be. So there's going to need to be rewrites, probably multiple rewrites. The challenge is, when you are doing the rewrites, how do you know what is good and what, like, are you rewriting this bit because it actually needs to be changed, or are you rewriting it for the sake of rewriting it? Like, do I have this sequence where, okay, is it good as it is? Does it need just a little bit of a tweak? Does it need to be completely overhauled? And yeah, so I'd say the most difficult thing is being able to decide what and how much, what parts need to change. Yeah, because there is not changing enough, but there is such a thing as changing too much.
Too much, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then you have to make sure that the things you do change, they still line up with the things that you don't.
Yeah. And Michael, did you work with a publisher on this book?
For this book, no. I mean, I did initially try to go through the traditional process, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to find. I did find one agent who I briefly talked with, where it looked like there might be something. I don't know what happened, but eventually, I don't know what happened, but it's one of those situations where it at least felt like being ghosted. Like, I don't know what was happening on the other end.
Sure.
So then so I did put it on a shelf for a while, but then later I went back and I used a hybrid publisher, which is kind of it's got some mix of both, but it's a lot more similar to self-publishing, but
Gotcha.
It's not fully self-published, but it's...
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because when you said, knowing to rewrite certain sections or different things, was that all stuff that you had to sit down yourself and say, okay, I've got to read through this. Does it make sense? Does it flow right? Or did you have anyone help you edit and say, hey, Michael, maybe there could be a change here, or maybe this one's not so clear for the audience, or that's where I guess I was going is, was that something you had to do on your own, was to decide which parts to edit and which to leave alone?
For the most part, it was just based on my own looking at it. And though I did have some people that I know go through it and give me notes on what they saw.
Like a peer review?
Kind of. People I know go through it and gave notes like, here's what they thought about it. So it wasn't entirely, but I didn't have someone whose professional job was to go through and say, you need to change this, you need to rewrite this. I did have an editor go through for a cleanup, but that was after the process of the book's pretty much
after it was already done. Yeah, that's great to know, because I would think that it would be hard from an artist perspective, and I consider writing a form of art, to put your art out there, you're writing, have an editor take it, and then them come back to you and say, oh, I need you to cut this, or I need you to do that, because this is something that you developed. So I mean, obviously I would probably say, I don't want to cut anything. I wrote it, and I think this is the best version, right? That's why I submitted it. But yeah, I think that would be hard to work as an artist in that way,
Yeah, there's definitely a balance in that, of being able to both confidently know what the story needs to be, but also being able to listen to what other people have as input, and then deciding, okay, does this actually need to change, or am I just biased and I want to keep it because I like it?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's what I think that would be the hard part for me, for sure, especially if I wrote it.
Yeah, there's like the story I'm working on right now, for another example, there's one element where, with certain chapters, for a transition, I'm starting the chapter out with "meanwhile," and one of the people who looked over it kind of noted that and said, and suggested changing it, but questioned, okay, is this a stylistic choice? In which case, yes, it's a stylistic choice.
Right.
The fact that I start those chapters repeatedly with "meanwhile" is something I did for a very specific reason, and so that's a case where, yes, I can understand where this person is coming from, but the way I'm writing this story, and
it's a method to your madness.
It's a piece of advice that I can say, yes, this particular decision is better as it is.
Yep. Gotcha. Excellent. So with Junkworld, how did you come up with the idea of a world for discarded machines?
Well, I didn't come up with it myself. I saw someone else that had written a different version of it. And what wound up happening was, I had Leroy kind of got created before Junkworld itself. So, but then I created Junkworld based on this other person's version of a Junkyard Planet. Created my own version of Junkworld so that I could have Leroy in that, both so that I wasn't, stealing the, I'm just taking what this other person did directly, and also it would mean that the version I have is better suited for the story I want to tell. So it's one of those instances of, like, what's the saying go? Great artists steal, but
right.
not directly enough.
No. Yeah,
You know,
ideas, bases of ideas, but not word for word. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm taking inspiration from what someone else has done that I think, okay, I like this. I can do something with this, but making it my own. And it's one of those things where, yeah, a junkyard planet. It's not. I mean, it's something that I don't think. I think it's an idea that has been out there before, but in this particular instance, yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. It comes with your own story, own background. So even though the idea of the junk world planet, maybe in some other instances has been there, the
yeah,
story is going to be different with what
yeah,
we
and it's
we
it's
see.
one where I feel confident in saying that the version I've created is uniquely my own, where you wouldn't have someone saying, "Well, I this looks like it's a direct copy off this
Yeah,
other example."
you have to think a lot of stuff. I like to call it recycled. We
Yeah,
recycle some ideas that give us a baseline, but then we turn that into our own, right?
yeah. I mean, yeah, and that is really just a general theme with stories where they like the saying goes like there's no new original ideas, and I mean there is an element of truth to that. Like
Yeah.
how many big ideas, how many of the biggest franchises that we see today can draw direct inspiration from draw inspiration from things that have already been created.
Yep. And you see a lot of that these days, don't you? I mean, because you're right. And, to a point, it's, you always see something similar. And like you said, there are some things out there that are complete ripoffs, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of stuff we see is similar, but has its own unique worth, with itself.
Well, in some ways, I think we don't see enough of that today because we see too much of we're just going to take what already exists and
Yeah.
remake it, when it would be better for people to say, well, we're going to take this pre-existing property, but we're going to reimagine it and create it as its own setting. Like how many different, yeah, how many stories that, like how many things that are version, like for example, this what you have with Star Wars right now. How many of those? I mean, at least some of those, like there's the element of you're trying to latch on these stories that you actually want to tell, and you're basically leeching off Star Wars when no, you really should just create your own universe to tell these stories that you actually want to
Right.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of reminds me of something, thinking of, because Star Wars triggered my memory, was I see a lot of similarities between, this is, hopefully you don't laugh at me, but between Star Wars and Harry Potter. Two different universes, but very similar storylines, right? You have a kid that grows up as an orphan who is raised by his aunt and uncle, who then has someone, with magical abilities come and take him away to learn, the force or magic. So, I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of the same story arc, but different, totally different worlds.
Well, in some ways, I mean, that kind of just goes back to certain underlying storytelling themes. Like it's like it has been cited that Star Wars, at least the original movies, are
Mm-hmm.
basically the perfect distillation of the hero's journey. And so, yeah, there is going to be those similarities, even if it's not intentional, where, Harry Potter, Star Wars, yeah, they're both performing some version of the hero's story. There is
Yes.
obviously going to be similarities. I mean, if you want to, I mean, I think look at a more direct connection, and it's kind of more directly talking about what I was referencing before. Originally, George Lucas wanted to do his own version of Flash Gordon. When he couldn't do his own version of Flash Gordon, well, then he created his own story. And that's one of those, and I mean, that's one of those things where I think, hey, it's a good thing he couldn't get Flash Gordon, because we got this whole new universe that is
Yeah.
bigger than Flash Gordon ever was.
So
You
much more.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you see the same thing with Super Mario, and which originally the Donkey Kong was supposed to be a Popeye adaptation. So imagine if Nintendo had been able to get the rights to Popeye,
Yeah.
we might not have any of Nintendo as we know it.
Yeah. That's true.
So that's one of those things where, yeah, it is better. It is a good thing that's what we need more of, is rather than just trying to reimagine what already exists, take it, put your own spin on it, and spin out something new.
Yeah. Yep.
Another example of something where that should have happened is that, one of those movies that kind of weans and wanes in the popular consciousness is the American Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
If you look at that American Godzilla movie in and of itself, it's an enjoyable movie in its own right. Problem is that it comes with that baggage of Godzilla, and it's one of those movies where if it had just been its own thing, it would have been received a lot better.
Right.
And it's one of those, it's that kind of situation.
Yep. I gotcha. And so that comes to character development and story development. And in Junkyards, were there any plot points or character arcs that you debated over where you're just like, I really want to do this, or maybe I shouldn't do that, or anything like that?
Yeah, there were at least a couple instances. For example, I don't want to say names, because spoilers, but there is a character in the story, for example, who, when I had the basic outline, it was a character that I was going to live to the very end, but there came a point where I recognized cannot justify keeping this character alive because it would not be in line with with how I have established this character. There's another element where what really surprised me is there is a character in the story who in the earliest drafts, the earliest outlines, this character didn't exist. But then I created this character to fill a role that was needed, like a ship's captain. And as I was writing this story and writing for this character, the ship's captain turned into, I'd say, one of the most important characters in the book. And I'd say someone with one of the strongest story arcs. And this is for a character that I created because the character needed to fill a role.
Gotcha. So it was not part of your original thought.
A character, when I originally conceived the story and figured out the outline of, okay, here's what's going to happen, this character wasn't on the radar, for all intents and purposes, did not exist. But then after I put the character in the story, it's kind of like I've heard it said, like, there's two types of stories. You have people who plot it out and then people who write by the seat of their pants. So in a way, this captain is kind of like a character written by the seat of the pants, put in a story that was plotted out.
Thought
so
out.
It's like
you're mixing the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, which I found really amusing. And I think that there's definitely an alternate version of this. There's a potential alternate version of the story where that could have developed into the main character, except the problem is there's a very much a segment that, for natural reasons, this character is removed from the story. And so it's a very strong enough presence, and with a heavy enough reworking, it could potentially be shifted to this captain character. But the story as it is, and the story as I thought it needed to be, the story I wanted to tell, it was very much Leroy's story from beginning to end.
Yeah, excellent. But it sounds like you had some good character choices and some good strong characters throughout the entire novel, though.
Yeah, there's a handful of central strong characters. There's a few characters that get some strong moments to really examine who this character is, and there's a lot of characters that there's a few beats. So, but that's really how it is. In some ways, it's kind of like in real life where there's some people that you know a lot about, that you can really understand them. Some characters that you just meet in passing reference, or you know about that you just know about through one particular talking point that kind of overrides and becomes easy to forget that this is a fully developed human being.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's like your family, friends, and then your acquaintances, right?
Yeah, or even just people who are in popular culture who you don't even know personally.
Yeah.
You might have a passing, who by chance you might have a passing interaction with. This is a really amusing story that comes to mind, because that's kind of relates to that, kind of a little bit relevant to current events, is that now I live in South Dakota, and our governor, our previous governor, was recently chosen to be one of Donald Trump's cabinet appointments.
Mm-hmm.
So several years ago, though, I was at an event that she was also at, and it's an event where there's tables that people sit at, and I had arrived at the event a little after most other people had arrived there.
Yeah.
Now I get there and there's not many seats left, but what winds up happening is I eventually, I like one of the few tables, the table I eventually sit at is where she had been sitting there and talking with other people. So I basically wind up in that seat, and so it's I wind up joking that the governor is my seat warmer.
That's funny. I like that. Yep, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So have you received any feedback from any fans or any fan theories or anything like that on your books?
I have unfortunately not had, well, it's a very mixed situation because on the one hand, I haven't had a lot of feedback after the fact because I really haven't connected with the audience, or I haven't managed to present it out there in a way where people are seeing it and convinced that, yeah, I have to read this.
Gotcha.
But the few people who have read it, the few people who have given me feedback, it has been positive.
Good.
Like right now, I believe there's like 3 reviews on Amazon, but all 3 of them are like 5 stars. So it's
nice.
It's a very mixed feeling but it's one where I feel confident that if only I could connect it with the right people, it would be in a very it's encouraging. It's something that I've chosen to take in an encouraging light, and kind of like what I mentioned before. Okay, how do you react to the things that life throws at us? I could look at it as, man, only 3 people have reviewed the book. Or I could look at it as, and what I choose to look at instead is, well, the people who have read it have all given it very positive feedback.
Yes.
Which is the kind of encouragement and the kind of positive feedback where I think it's the kind of positive feedback which tells me, like, encourages me to keep writing, to write other projects, thinking, okay, if I write enough of these and they're all good enough, eventually one of them has a chance of sticking.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not every single, book or every single, in my case, show is going to be, a hit. But, I was talking to a gentleman the other day. I believe his name's Terry Whalen. I don't know if you've heard of him. He does some publishing. And, he said one of the number one myths is that my book is going to make a lot of money. And I was like, yeah, I guess, but the fact is what I applaud is artists like yourself, Michael, and even, when I talked to Terry is that you have the guts and the courage to put your thoughts down on paper, well, I now I'm aging myself, on paper, computer screen, whatever it may be, you put your thoughts down, and then you take that initiative and go and run with it, publish your book and get it out there. Because let me tell you this, Michael, had you never gotten out there, you would have never known if anybody would have liked it. But as far as 3 5-star reviews, I look at that as quality over quantity, right? You could have 1 million reviews, but if they're all 1 star, nobody cares. No one's going to read it.
I mean, there is something to be said that if you have there are certain 1-star books where they're a special kind of 1-star where people will read them just for bile fascination.
Yep.
But I would definitely prefer having a book that people want to read because they think it's enjoyable rather than they want to laugh at it.
Yeah. And you know what? That kind of brings me to my next story. And I think I have an answer, and I think we've already talked about this too, but why do you think stories like Junkworld resonate with readers?
Well, I am uncertain. I think this is a question I'd have a hard time answering. I mean, this is something where I definitely think the small pool of people who have read it, who have given it feedback, makes it difficult to say, okay, here's what makes it actually resonate with people. If I were to guess at potential reasons for it to resonate with people, I would say one, going back to, okay, how do, life upended, life getting upended, which you mentioned before. The other is that something that came to mind to me as a potential selling point when I was working on it is, especially for younger readers, finding yourself in a new situation and learning to adapt
Yeah. Oh, I love
to
that.
this new world. Like if you're a child, you're moving into a new level, like if you're moving from elementary school to high school, or if you're moving from high school to college.
Yep.
That's one of
Or
those
even,
things where,
yeah, even think if you're moving from college to the working world too,
yeah,
right?
where
Those are all huge.
where depending on where your life is, it could be an easy transition, or it could be a huge life upending
Absolutely.
situation, and you got to figure out, okay, how do I adapt to this new world that I find myself in?
Yeah, and with Junkworld, like you said, here's a guy, here's a robot that's fighting, right, and winning fights, and go down for maintenance. Next thing you know, he wakes up in Junkworld. I mean, I can't think of anything more, more adversary than that.
Yes.
Wait a second, why am I here? I was just getting maintenance. And I think a lot of us, a lot of readers could resonate with that, saying that, a lot of us are taken from one world and put into another world, and it can happen so quickly that we don't even notice it.
But yeah, I mean, one of the few things you can count on life is that life is unpredictable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the most predictable thing about life, right? Is
Yeah.
its unpredictability.
I mean, you could have everything perfectly set up, have everything where you think you have everything under control, only for, the weather to come along and throw
Exactly.
like you could have, like, you think you have everyone doing exactly what you want them to, but how do you account for controlling the weather?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when we have such a difficult time actually predicting the weather.
Yeah, I think if anybody could have a job like a weatherman and only be, accurate 30% of the time, I think we'd we'd all we'd all be weathermen, right?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a good point, because even just like here, I live in Ohio, Michael, and yesterday I swear we saw all four seasons in one day. We saw
Wow.
in the morning I woke up, it was almost 60 degrees and the sun was shining. By the afternoon, it was in the 50s and raining. Then the wind picked up in the evening, and then it started snowing, and I got an inch of snow on the ground today. So 60 to snow, that's exactly a
Yeah.
perfect thing. How would I have ever prepared for that?
Yeah. No.
No way I could have.
Yeah. I think and I mentioned I'm in South Dakota, and these past few days there was talking about how there was going to be how there was going to be a couple of inches. It was going to be terrible weather, but it actually turned out to be pretty mild right around this spot. I mean, I've heard
Yeah.
that it was worse elsewhere,
Sure, yeah, always.
this winter in general here has been relatively mild. There has been a lot of days where it's felt like it's either fall or spring, but we've had there was several years back, there was just a giant ice storm in April where you had everything coated in like an inch or so of ice. And this is when you would think you'd be solidly in spring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think
yeah, we've had that happen here before. I've seen it snow in May here in Ohio, and that's almost unheard of.
yeah, it is impossible to truly have your life completely under control, because there is always some element that can upend it.
And I think that, and that's just like you said, I think that's a good point, that this could resonate with a lot of readers, from
Yeah.
that aspect of showing you how, a change, and you can adapt and overcome to those things. And one thing that we talked about too, Michael, was just the fact that I think these types of stories, like we've already discussed, resonate so much because they take you out of reality and put you into a brand new world that you can just escape from
Yeah.
for a little bit.
Yeah, and there's a couple other things that give me hope. One being, it's no surprise that the past few years have been very economically difficult. So that's
Yes.
going to create an extra level of, how do you convince someone to buy a book when, they're worrying about just general economic things. And, from the looks of things, I think everyone is feeling encouraged that things are going to get better going on,
Yeah.
meaning there's a better opportunity for people to learn about this book and say, okay, I think I
Yes.
can maybe spend the money to check this book out. The second thing is that even if it's not getting any mileage now, another element of, regardless of even if this hasn't sold now, I'm still going to keep writing other books.
Yeah.
This book will continue to be available. Meaning, if I hopefully put together some book in the future that does connect in that way, where there are people who want to read it, well, they will already be available for someone who says,
Yes.
okay, I like what this author has done. What else has this writer put together? Well, there will already be this book available that rather than while waiting for whatever I may come out next,
book,
they can go look back and say, okay, this person wrote this book as well. Maybe I can give this book a shot.
Yeah, and think about it. That happens a lot of times with artists where they put something out, and maybe just because you're, who knows, maybe you're not known, or because it is a newer book, your first book on the market, maybe people don't pick it up. But then, like you said, you write something new, it resonates with folks, and they're like, Michael's already got this book too. Well, let me go check that. Next thing you know, now you got two, three, 4, 5 books that are making it. So it just takes that one book to get you going. But I mean, this one it was just so fascinating to me, Michael, because when we hooked up on Podmatch, and just for the listeners, we met on a service called Podmatch. It just hooks up, podcast hosts and guests so that we could talk and have fun conversations like this and get to learn about each other. But yeah, that's what I was so interested about so first of all, I love science fiction. I love reading science fiction, I think, more than I love watching it, just because of the fact, and I think I told you this earlier, was I love to use my imagination. So when I'm reading a book, I get to take your words and visualize my own picture, which may not be the same picture as yours, but you give me the creative guise to sit there and say, in my mind, okay, what does this look like? Now, of course, you're going to have some descriptors in there and things like that, but that's what I love about science fiction, is it takes you to a world where it's, half normal, half not, and you mix it together, and it's just, I don't know, for me, it's a great escape. So that's why I was so glad to have you on the show.
Yeah.
But Michael, what's next for you? Do you have any plans coming up?
Well, yeah, I definitely have plans. I mean, aside from, I'm previously mentioning, like, I've got a folder of story ideas to get to. I have one story that I'm getting very close to being ready for publishing. It's very much a shift from what I've done, because it's a fantasy book, but it's envisioned as more an older fashioned fairy tale for children.
Nice.
Right now, and the story itself is all complete. It's just a matter of, I have someone I'm working on for art for the interior, and then I'm actually working on putting together the cover myself, because as I was thinking of this, one thing I really wanted to do is, I don't know if anyone else is familiar, where I remembered certain books from my childhood that had covers that looked like they had a kind of construction paper kind of style. So I've been going, and I basically taking that, we're cutting out pieces of the construction paper and assembling a cover.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So really right now, the two main things are really, it's just a matter of getting the art put together. And like last night, I just finished figuring out, the concept art for a dragon that is a central character in the book, so that the person who is doing the art knew what to actually draw for the pictures that have this dragon in it. So yeah, once I've got the art done, that's going to be the next book I'm going to have published. I'm thinking that likely when I'm done with that, I'm going to take another book that I previously wrote and didn't get anything with the, wasn't successful through traditional publishing. I'll probably take a look at going through that again, doing maybe another write through, a cleanup, and then getting that published. That's a science fiction book that I actually kind of wrote around Junkworld, so they're kind of connected.
Well, that's cool.
It's more, I started on the one book. I started on the book I started on the one book.
Mm-hmm.
Then I kind of put it aside because I wasn't sure of some things on it. So then I went and did Junkworld. And then once I had finished with what I was going to do with Junkworld at the time, then I went back and wrote finished this other story. And so that's the sense of where I kind of wrote around it. And
gotcha.
They're connected in kind of a meta sense, but there's
not a direct connection.
There is absolutely nothing. Well, there's nothing in the story to say, well, I can see these two pieces to say, yes, these happen in the same universe.
Gotcha.
Yeah, aside from that, I've got...
That's it, yeah. Well, but for that book, anyway, yeah.
Well, but yeah, I mean, aside from that, I've also got another fantasy book that needs a lot of work yet, but that I started on before the children's fairy... But yeah, I could go on about these...
You got tons of projects coming up.
Suffice to say, I have no shortage of ideas and stories to work on. It's just a matter of, when do I get them done? How much time do I put into getting them done? And
Yeah,
yeah. And
exactly. And
as
dealing with life as well along the way, right?
yeah, and really, really that is one of the main things that of why I would like to actually develop my writing into something I can use as my primary source of income, is that if writing is my primary job, well, then I can spend more time writing rather
Exactly.
than treating it as a hobby that I have to go out and do my day job. And then
Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
I have more time for writing. I have more time to get these books done. I can write more stories, get more stories published. So
Yeah, and that's the tough part about taking
yeah.
your, a hobby, so to speak, which, to an actual profession, is making that leap. And because you're right. And I the same thing, I work a regular day job, and, then I come and podcast in the evening or on the weekends with folks like
Yeah.
yourself. And it's tough because you got to find the time, because not only do I have to find the time, right, to meet with you, Michael, but then I got to edit and I got to upload and do all that, the social
And then
media, all that stuff.
and then you have to find other guests to get on your show.
Exactly. But yeah, so exactly. I think we're two peas in a pod as far as that's concerned. Would I love to do podcasting for full time? Absolutely. Will it ever happen? Probably not. But as long as I get to meet interesting people like yourself, I'll keep doing it.
I mean, and you'll never achieve it if you don't work at it.
That's true. And consistency is one of the biggest keys to anything, really. Right?
Yeah. Sometimes the most important step is just showing up.
Yep.
Showing
Absolutely.
up prepared.
Because if you don't show up, nothing's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Excellent. Michael, is there anything else that you want to make the listeners aware of? Any websites or any books, anything else, really? Anything on your mind?
I think the only thing is giving a mention to another show I've been on recently. It was Book 101 Review. I did a recording of that, I think, last month, not too long ago. So I'm not sure if it's yet available on just that general website, but I'm keeping an eye out for anyone who wants to hear me talk more. Look up Book 101 and be keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, and it's a very popular podcast for authors and stuff. I know I've seen a lot of stuff on that podcast.
Okay.
So yeah.
Otherwise, I've got a number of other podcasts other podcast appearances I've been on over, since I first released this book. So I guess if anyone wants to just look up Michael Stangland or MK Stangland, look up Junkworld, they'll probably
find a good amount of information for them.
Yeah. If they want to listen to me talk about stuff other than my book, just general info, there's a podcast that I was on, kind of a recurring guest. The podcast is in a bit of a break right now because of certain issues, but the attention is, it's called Another Top 10 List with Kyle White.
Okay.
He is planning on bringing it back. It's just he's taking
a break.
Just taking a break for certain reasons, but he has planned to go back. But I've been on a number of those where it's just two people, sometimes three, put together a top 10 list in a certain category of,
nice.
Here are my top 10 favorite
X. Gotcha.
Like, for example, my first appearance was top 10 villains, where we each picked our top 10 villains and counted down. Here are my top 10 favorite villains. That then I also did top 10 robots.
I like
obviously that. In theme, but yeah, it's just that kind of thing. And
so, yeah, I like that. And that branches out a little bit. And too, Michael, same thing here. So while we share stories about normal everyday people that are doing extraordinary things like writing a book, right? That's, what we talk about. But if you ever want to come on and talk about anything else, all topics are welcome on this show. So
yeah,
everybody says we got to find a niche, but I'm like, I'm not going to find a niche yet, because my niche is sharing people's stories.
Yeah. Look, sometimes the niche is just talking about real life.
Yeah, exactly. We don't think about that as a niche, but because it's so broad, but
and it's not even necessarily about a niche, but it's about presenting the interview in an entertaining and interesting way.
Exactly. And that's what we try to do here at Just a Dude podcast, because we're just, I'm just a dude. Somebody asked me one time, they said, hey, Nathan, how would you explain yourself? And I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just a dude. So that's it, just kind of stuck. How can the listeners get your book?
Well, primarily point people to Goodreads, looking up Junkworld on Goodreads, but that's mostly because that's a location where if you click on the book, it has, my understanding, it has a link to just any of the general websites that will sell it. But
Good.
I mean, if you want to go more directly, just look it up on your favorite online retailer that sells books. You could go to Amazon, you could go to Barnes and Nobles, Walmart. I mean, just in general, if you have an online retailer that sells books that you like, you go look it up and I think you'll probably find it.
Yeah, and for our listeners as well, Michael's information, any links that he has will all be on justadudepodcast.com. He's going to have a guest page there, so you can go look him up and find out all his information there as well. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today's journey through the mesmerizing universe of Junkworld. I want to extend a massive thank you to our guest, MK Stangland, for sharing the incredible story behind Junkworld, the Ballad of Leroy Brown. If you're itching to dive into this tale of redemption, rebellion, and rust, you can grab your copy on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Don't forget to follow Michael on his creative journey and check out any upcoming projects or events. You can find all the links for Michael in our show notes or on his guest spot on justadudepodcast.com. Remember to like, subscribe, and share Just a Dude Podcast with every sci-fi fan you know. We're always here to explore new worlds, one story at a time, from regular, everyday people. Until next time, keep dreaming the impossible, because sometimes the discarded can become the heroes. I'm Nathan, signing off. Catch you on the next one.